Hello everyone and welcome to issue 77 of Anti-Life Reviews. This is the Tona Mackay, a master of minds and of mem. This month I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be going over comics that have had movies made out of them. That's not that unusual. And I'm going to try to pick well-known movies, but where the comics are not often talked about. I'm going to start with The Mask. He was originally Masque, appearing in Dark Horse Presents number 10 in 1987, and was a grimy, fourth-wall-breaking assassin. This was later retooled in Mayhem 1 through 4, which came out in May 1989 to September 1989, and was more of the finished character that persisted for some time. I will talk about the comparisons between the comic and the movie nearing the end of the review, so let's go ahead and get to it. But, of course, subscribe, do it. I want to continue making content, and I need your help to do that, trying to get that sweet, sweet YouTube money. Let's talk about the writers and artists on this. The writer for this is John Arcudi. Not only the main writer on a good portion of the Mask-related content, but was a mainstay with various Hellboy and BPRD-related comics, and a lot of Dark Horse-related stuff in general. On top of that, he's worked for both Marvel and DC on various projects. Is a competent writer, not someone I rate particularly high, though. And the artist in this is Doug Manky, a legitimately great artist, spent a lot of time of his career in DC Comics. I'd say for me his most important works were his Action Comics issue, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. This was also turned into the animated film Superman vs. the Elite, no, not the Bullet Club. And, of course, Superman Beyond he did during Final Crisis, which I loved. It was Superman Beyond 3D, that is. A big fan of Doug. His style is kinetic. It pops out. It's alive with energy. Yeah. Alright, well, it was published over multiple parts, like I said, in Mayhem. The whole thing comes out to around less than 60 pages. So I'm going to go over and go to his one complete story. We meet one Stanley Ipkiss, perpetual victim, buying an antique mask for $135. He is then summarily beaten by a biker gang for insulting them, which leads to him fantasizing about killing them in a variety of ways. He then goes to his inexplicably attractive girlfriend Catherine's apartment, whom he is on the outs with. The mask is a gift for her, as kind of a peacemaking gift. That night, as a lark, he puts on the mask, turning into a green-faced monster with giant teeth, which they will aptly name Big Head. He immediately sets off, seemingly still partly Stanley inside his mind, and is hit by a car, but is totally fine without any injury. This solidifies the decision for him to go over to the biker gang clubhouse and begin killing them in ways he had imagined earlier. We'll see he can manifest things out of nowhere, such as weapons, like an Uzi, which he does. After the massacre, he sets fire to the house. Within a short time, Stanley Ipkiss has changed, dressing curiously in fatigues and is far more aggressive, short-tempered. He's making enemy lists like he's Nixon, fighting with Catherine, actually raising a hand to her, not hitting her, thankfully. He leaves with the mask, of course, and goes to a car shop that wronged him, and as Big Head, murders them in particularly gruesome ways. He beats up as well, maybe kills a teacher who wronged him in elementary school, long time to hold a grudge, buddy, and smacks around a child bully for returning home and passing out from exhaustion after taking off the mask. The police are now officially on the trail of Big Head, with a Detective Calloway leading the charge. Catherine tosses the mask in a bin, and while Stanley is initially mad, he decides it might be better off not to have it, so he can gain some control back over his life, and of course most of his hit list is already taken care of. But Stanley is a cunt. He fights with Catherine not shortly after, so she kicks him out. Later in the night, he breaks in to steal the mask. She smashes a vase over his head and calls the cops before she realizes who it is. But of course, by the time the cops arrive, Stanley is Big Head again, and it's time for the big showdown with the police, which leads to over a dozen cops killed in various horrifying ways. Flamethrowers, ran over, guns, etc. At the end, he arrives back at his apartment, removes the mask, and decides he's going to leave town, but he is shot by Catherine, who is now wearing the mask and is the new Big Head. Well, let's go over the overview on this. The official name for the masked character is Big Head. That's what the cops call him for the remainder of most of the comics. Now, I was originally going to look at the first 4-issue mini. That's about Catherine and Calloway with the mask, since, as we see, Stanley Ipkiss is killed at the end of this. So let's talk about the difference between the movie, the Jim Carrey one. I won't be talking about the Jamie Kennedy one, obviously. It's really going to come down to tone and character. And as far as tone goes, it's wildly different. The comic is violent, incredibly so. While the things Big Head does are almost cartoonish, they have a realistic reaction to them. People die. They are murdered in bloody and brutal ways. They're burnt, shot. Their skin is ripped across car parts. Really horrible ways of killing people, indicative of the mind of a petty man who finally has power. Meanwhile, Carrie's character, well, Violent, is more vaudevillian. He's silly. There's a lot of preamble set up before relatively tame things. Sans raping a man with a car part, which does happen. While it's painful, it's ultimately not totally detrimental. These people are mostly going to survive. He doesn't actually want to kill people. He just wants to give them some comeuppance. And the level of gore is, of course, toned down exceptionally. Though he did keep the kinds of people he was dealing with, and even in some parts the same kind of violence, just wildly different in the tone. Like, he did go to the biker gang. He did deal with people at the car place. So characters, as far as characters goes, Stanley, the only real similarities in both are that Stanley Ipkiss is a dope, who gets picked on a lot, and gets a mask. That's where it ends, really. Comic Stanley, as I reiterated, is a man whose inner rage affects every part of his life. He is impotent and hateful. He's a bad friend and a bad boyfriend, and generally a bad person. You get the feeling some of the ways people treat him are not totally undeserved, and his fetishistic lust for violence comes out when putting on the mask. And his personality shifts once he gets it to a bordering alt-right psychopath who is openly misogynistic and mean. His obsession, his addiction to the mask becomes his undoing as he spirals into violence and confrontation until he is finally killed. Now, movie Stanley, his personality, he's a nice person who is taken advantage of. You don't get the feeling he would really hurt a fly. And he didn't really want to hurt people. He didn't like the violence the other persona was doing. And while the mask made him more charming, it didn't make him into a totally different monster. And Stanley seems perfectly capable of holding on to relatively normal relationships beyond the mask. Now, Catherine in this is Tina in the movie. No real similar except they are love interests and blonde. Catherine, of course, had a great ponytail in the comic. We have no initial idea what she does with her time, and she's fed up with Stanley's increasingly abusive tendencies. Though even before the mask, he was not a good boyfriend, would frequently fight with her over stupid things. She was leagues ahead of him, and it's referenced in the comics a number of times that she's exceptionally attractive and out of his league. Tina is a gangster's girlfriend and nightclub singer who has personality of a doorstep. Yeah, okay. Detective Calloway, both in this and the movie, he is a generic cop. He has a lot more characterization in the first mini and subsequent ones on occasion. Nothing much to say here. He was good in the cartoon, which we'll talk about later. Now, Dorian in the movie, the gangster, and Walter in the comic. Now, Walter didn't appear into the first mini, but is sort of the main villain for the first two minis. Dorian is a generic mob boss, bad guy with slick black hair, but he resembles Walter in a lot of ways, especially when he puts on the mask. He becomes a big, hulking guy who's hard to hurt. As far as the writing and art go, the writing's fine. Difficult to judge based on this. Like I said, it's about 50 pages. But the story flows nicely. It was concise. Everyone made sense. What few characters there were, they were fine. We had an arc to Stanley's story. There was a beginning, middle, and end. And it left us wanting more of Big Head and strange adventures. So yeah, fairly well written. And that last shot with Catherine with the mask is really cool. The art was awesome. It was clearly a younger Doug here. He was a little bit rough around the edges and parts. But it was still very effective, visceral, raw, violent, gory. At times exceptionally so. But never over the top, which is weird to say. You might be jarred by it if you're unfamiliar with this version of the character, though. Reading this, something sparked me, and I know it's total leap in logic. These two things remind me of each other, and I don't know why. A magical totem comes to a man who has a secret dark welling inside of him that helps him exact revenge on people who he thinks have wronged him, especially in list form. That's not the most original story in the world, but I couldn't help but think of Death Note, and how Stanley is the American Light Yagami. Obviously, the two have nothing in common save that generic story beat. I would just love to see a masked Death Note crossover. If anyone out there can do it, you can, Internet. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of the movie, but I was a bigger fan of the cartoon. I'd mentioned it really briefly earlier. I don't know, it felt like a lot more fleshed out of the character of Stanley and of everyone else in the movie, including people that you didn't see at all. John Arsuti wrote a few episodes of it, so it kind of gives it a nice canon feel that the movie never had. I had no idea if it holds up. I haven't seen it in years, but the availability of it is there. I think most of it is on Amazon Prime. Of course, just pirate it anyways. Who cares? Overall, this is a very entertaining comic, and frankly, they stay pretty entertaining, at least for the first 2 minis. The quality past that waxes and wanes, but of course, there are a lot of cool Mask crossovers. They did Mask Hellraiser, they did Mask Joker, and there was a couple other ones that were kind of neat. We haven't really seen, outside of Mask Running for President, a long-form Mask comic in a long time, though. But this is to be expected. He wasn't, outside of the movie, he wasn't, for the fleeting moment that the movie had something, wasn't that popular of a character. I would say, though, if you have any passing interest in The Mask, give this one a read. Well, that was the first of this month's comics that were turned into movies, with The Mask. Do you think the movie should be rebooted, maybe in the more grim and gritty way as they are wont to do now? Let me know down below. I'm actually kind of curious. I've not really given it much thought. Also, have me on Instagram under Demon Peaks for daily Twin Peaks memes. Check out my podcast, The Dark Peaks Podcast, where me and another gentleman talk about fucked up shit and occasionally talk about regular shit. And of course, go to my Patreon and tell me what you want me to review. Next week, we keep it in the 90s with the first comic book run of Men in Black. This has been Nito Namakaya, Master of Minds and Men, and goodbye.